Hey everyone, I'm Rene Ritchie. It is May 15, 2014. Right now we're going to talk about Beats and Apple, iOS 8, OS 10, 10.10, multi-window on the iPad, the resolution of the iPhone 6, and all the week in Apple. We are brought to you this week by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, online store, anything that you need to be marvelous or wonderful on the web. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com/iMore. Enter offer code iMore at checkout, and it will be your beginning towards a better, brighter website. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, we have the executive editor, the managing editor, the all-around editor of iMore.com, Mr. Peter Cohen. How are you?
Hey there, Rene. Good. Well, I'm nursing a bit of a spiritual hangover after my beloved Bruins lost to your, hated Habs last night. But otherwise, I'm okay.
I hated I barely follow hockey, except I am a Montrealer, so I was happy. But I loved how Georgia was trolling you on Twitter. It was superb.
She was mean. I kept saying that I was going to report her to HR for creating a hostile work environment. Nobody takes me seriously. What kind of monkey outfit are we running here?
Also joining us, we have one of my favorite guests, one of my favorite writers. He is the senior editor at 9to5Mac and all-around ace reporter, Mark Gurman. How are you, Mark? Doing well. How about you? I'm doing very well, thank you. Mostly because you've been giving us so many good things to feel good about lately, Mark. Really? I'm going to dive straight in. I'm not going to start with the rumors because, well, I'm going to start with different rumors, not device rumors, not OS rumors. I'm going to start with the rumor that Apple might be buying, acquiring, doing something with Beats, the company that I think primarily involves Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre. Trent Reznor's in there as well. Peter, I just default to you when it comes to all things music. I'm going to give you my quick take, though, because I'd like to break this apart. At the onset, this makes about as much sense as Facebook buying Nutella, although Facebook buys everybody. But when I started thinking about it, there were some interesting synergies. I'm not talking about headsets. Apple can make their own high-priced, headsets. Streaming audio, maybe if Beats has transferable streaming rights. But Apple has not had a success at transferring their downloads into streaming, and Jimmy Iovine sounds like he knows a lot of what's happening in music. And I've also heard that like Eddie Q just gets dumped on. He gets everything thrown his way. I think he's senior vice president of being fire marshal now at Apple. It's just never ending. He's going to negotiate every contract, run every online service. I could see Iovine coming on just to take that off Eddie Q's plate.
Okay. But is Jimmy Iovine worth paying $3.8 billion for, whatever it's rumored that Apple spent?
So that's a lot of money in Apple bucks because they bought Next for what was it, $400 million back in the day?
$400 million, but Apple's balance sheets looked very different back then too.
Yeah, so $3.2 billion. I think, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. That's as much as Apple earns in the time it took me to say this is how much Apple earns.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, if you adjust for inflation, yes, but.
What was your take when you heard this, Mark? This is one of the few stories that you didn't break this week.
Well, I love Dr. Dre, huge Dre fan. So getting Dre, hooked up with a company I cover, couldn't get any better than that. But I've been using Beats Music since the story broke, and has some good stuff. There's this feature called The Sentence where you can choose like where you are, who you're with, and what you want to do, what genre you like, and it will play a playlist for you with songs based on what you've inputted into that system, and the output is very good. I've been using iTunes Radio before that, and it's total junk and it's horrible. So I think this is going to be a great move for Apple.
I was a big fan. I'm going to call this episode Straight Outta Cupertino. Just FYI.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Dre going back to NWA, and Jimmy Iovine, I mean, I don't know of him or him as well, but it looks like he's at least been a very smart, very savvy businessman. And another one of the theories about this deal is that while Apple has incredible brand affinity, they don't have a lot of positive growth. Like the iPhone is the biggest product of our decade. There's not going to be another one, so they have to look into other areas to expand because Wall Street does not care about profits. Wall Street just wants growth. and one of the things they could do is increase their addressable market. And it seems to me that Beats is incredibly popular in areas where Apple might not be as popular. And I don't know all the segmentation off the top of my head, but you've got to imagine that Beats is incredibly popular in many parts of America. It's got incredible brand affinity in areas that Apple might not. Peter, do you think there's any sort of harmony or I don't know what the right word is for that, but any sort of I'm not going to say leverage the synergies, because you should rightly smack me through the hangout if I said that. But it looks like they could work together in some areas.
I don't know if they can or if they can't. I do know that a private equity firm came in last year and valued Beats at $1 billion. Gave them $500 million to grow their business. Well, didn't give them, lent them $500 million to grow their business. So looking at it purely from that standpoint, I don't understand what the company is bringing to the table here that would make Apple jump at that. If I understand correctly, music rights aren't transferable. So I know that there was some question about that early when this news broke, or when this rumor broke. So I don't think that that's drawing Apple to the table. I posted an editorial about this, after the news broke last week. I just don't see what Apple's upside to this is at all. As far as the products themselves, I've used Beats. I've used Beats since Beats came out. I think the product quality is awful. I think that, and I know that they haven't improved over the years. I know that the Beats customers who are buying new products have the same problems as people who have been buying Beats, since before any of this stuff got started. So it doesn't seem to be something that would really improve Apple's brand cachet at all. I don't really know that Apple wants to get that involved with a company whose product quality is, mediocre. And there's nothing particularly innovative about the technology that makes Beats products work. There's nothing that other headphones don't do. So, Rene, I am just a big question mark about this whole thing.
That's why we have you here, Peter, so I don't get too excited and run us off a cliff too quickly.
Okay. I agree on that, Peter's point about the headphones from Beats being mediocre. I've had some pairs, and they fall apart as quick as an acquisition could fall apart. But Apple always talks about when they're making acquisitions about like what would be a good fit, and Apple makes mediocre headphones and Beats make mediocre headphones. So there's some synergy right there. So.
That's well, the other thing, a couple other things to consider. One is there was a question about whether Apple could keep the Beats brand. Apple kept Siri called Siri, and I know that probably because they could, Assistant wasn't a great name, and they probably couldn't think of anything better. But it doesn't seem out of the question to me that Apple could keep Beats around as a brand. They could even improve the quality of the product and keep the sort of brand cachet that they have. But Mark, you've written a lot about Apple and fashion, all the fashion hires they've been doing. And I know Ben Thompson and some other people have talked about Apple becoming more of a fashion brand. Do you think that could play into the story?
Definitely. There's talk about, the design for Beats being, not in-house. But I don't really think that matters, because Beats and Dr. Dre and Ivy and all those people involved there, they have the experience on the business side and the marketing side and the conceptual side and the branding side of these wearable fashion products. Beats, people don't buy Beats because of how they sound. Like Peter said, they're pretty awful if you're an audiophile. But people buy them for the name, the brand recognition, how they look. And a lot of people buy Apple products because of how they look too. So I think that they could help out a lot in terms of working with those new Apple fashion hires and in terms of retail and marketing in that fashion sector.
Angela Ahrens could sell the hell out of those headphones.
She can sell the hell out of anything.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to watch. I mean, the rumor was that the deal was going to happen this week, and now the rumor is that the deal is going to happen next week, and that could persist. Rumor punting could persist for the foreseeable future. There was a rumor that Dre and Iovine could walk out on stage at WWDC.
Yeah, so ridiculous. Like, come on. Here, I'll use your own words. Like, you keep talking about how there probably won't be hardware at WWDC because it's a developer conference, and now they're trying to say that there's going to be a rapper on stage because of at a developer conference.
And if I can put on my cranky old man hat for a second, you know, when this rumor got started, everybody tried to do some smart analysis about what it might mean. Then the analysis got really stupid really quickly because there's absolutely no hard news, hard information to work with right now. So then it became about as relevant as what this Beats Apple deal means to this ham sandwich that I'm going to have for lunch. I wish people would just shut up already.
There was a Facebook video.
And that includes you! That includes you, Richie! Shut up about this damn deal!
There was a Facebook video, Peter. That's hard news. No, that's not hard news. Yeah, no, you know, I find this stuff interesting because for me it's not about any specific rumor, but it's a chance to sort of reflect on Apple as a company, what their priorities are, what their weaknesses are. And when you analyze deals like this, I think it helps understand the deals that are made and the deals that aren't made. And one of the interesting aspects here is I think that a Beats deal, a lot of people say Apple should buy Twitter, Apple should buy this or that company, which would be a cultural nightmare. There's very few ways to assimilate other large businesses into Apple. But Beats is a music company. Apple considers, you know, music part of their DNA. Jimmy Iovine is an executive who could work at Apple and get things done with music labels. Beats as a company does not seem like a cultural clash to me with Apple at all.
No, I mean, Iovine was tight with Steve. We've all seen the photos, right? You know, of him and Steve chumming together and stuff like that. Look, it could happen. We can't read too much into Tyrese Gibson's thing about Dre being the first hip-hop billionaire. I got news for everybody. Dre was on the way there anyway. So who knows what put him over? For all you know, interest on what he's got could have put him over the $1 billion mark. Dre is a very rich man, and Beats is doing well. You know, Beats is doing, and I'm sure that he's being well compensated for it. So, you know, let's just let things lie until we know more. But, you know, the thing is, you look at Beats' products, you look at their music service, you look at their penetration in markets. I don't see anything here that Apple can't do by itself. That's why this deal makes no sense for me, and I would love for somebody to explain it. But so far, nobody's come up with any plausible explanations.
I agree with you completely. But the other thing that I found interesting, Mark, is that the reaction to it, I think, tells us a lot. Because a lot of people, especially on Wall Street, said, Apple's not doing anything bold. Look at all the acquisitions Google's making. Look at all the acquisitions Facebook's making. Apple's boring. Apple's not buying big enough companies. And then when there's a rumor that Apple might, it's like, Apple's stupid. Apple's throwing their money away. Apple's doing done. Again, I find the reaction of the market one of the most interesting aspects of this.
Right, but let's be fair about that. $3.2 billion for Beats. What did Google buy for $3.2 billion a few months ago? Nest, Tony Fadell, hundreds of former Apple engineers who created the iPod, iPhone, and the iPad. For $3.2 billion, they could have got 300 people back that used to work there. They could have got an innovative new product category of home technology appliances that work with their existing ecosystem of products. So if you look at it that way, it's a total terrible move. If you just look at it that way, of course, who knows if Google jumped in and got ripped Nest out of Apple's hands? You could never know. But if you just look at it through that perspective, it's a shame for Apple.
It's 3 Instagrams. It's a quarter of a WhatsApp, right, or a fifth of a WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So by Facebook standards, it's a deal and a half.
Yeah.
All right, so moving along, one of the other things we've been talking about a lot, Mark, is the larger iPhone. Some people say 2 larger iPhones. I've heard of 1 larger iPhone, but no one really was putting screen resolution numbers to it. And it's an interesting market because Android phones have been 1080p for a while. LG is I think, on track to launch the first 2K phone. But you posted something yesterday that Apple's going to go for an at 3x. Resolution phone, which is 3 times the resolution of the original iPhone. The current iPhone is at 2x. What do you think about that? How do you think that plays into the market?
How does a bigger iPhone screen play into the market?
Well, the bigger screen, but that resolution on that bigger screen.
Well, the reason they're going 3x, and I think you've discussed this as well on iMore, is it allows the screen to become bigger. It allows the screen to become sharper. It requires minimal work from developers. It just remember when the iPhone 5 came out and the apps had to be centered in the middle of the screen? That wasn't a great experience. But what this is going to do for the existing Retina apps is just going to make them slightly blurrier until they get fixed up. So it's not going to really be a big downside to the customer at this point, unless probably for a couple months. But after that, it will be they'll just be steaming ahead. For Apple, it makes it easier for them to redesign all their software. And I think it's just it's also not a standard, which tells you that it's probably something Apple's doing, because Apple never goes with the standards. If Apple were going to standards, this new phone would be 1920 by 1080 or something like that. And another thing the 3X allows them to do is allows them to retain the 16 by 9 ratio on the iPhone 5, 5S, and 5C, which people are used to at this point, and developers are used to. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because the last 1X phone, the iPhone 3G, stopped being made. I think it was a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, depending on your geography. So they've kind of swept that away. Some developers might still support it, but you probably don't. You could argue that they don't need to anymore, which would mean there'll still be 2 resolutions to support. 3X is a little bit harder than 2X because 2X at least fell on the pixel grid, where 3X half the pixels will be off the pixel grid. So those pixels will get aliased until developers make new assets. But they did that, in 2010 for the iPhone 4. So it's not a huge deal. The one thing that concerns me, Peter, I don't know what your take is on this, is that with the iPhone 4 in 2010, Apple leapfrogged everybody. They went way ahead of all the 800 wide screens that Android was using at the time. This isn't a big leap. This isn't going past 1080p. This isn't going past 2K. This isn't going to at 4X. It's going to have Apple caught up a little bit, but still behind where Android is today. Do you think that matters?
I don't. No, I don't, because the user experience for using Apple products is different, and I think that as long as Apple is coming out with a larger form factor product, that's what's going to draw people to the iPad. That's what's going to. I mean, the iPhone. That's what people are going to be interested in. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have gone with larger device or larger form factor Android devices simply because the larger device is available. So that's the market need that Apple really has to address with this phone, not resolution. That's inside baseball that I don't think the customer really cares about at all.
It's sort of
Sure.
market. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point by Peter. And like Peter said, people care about the bigger screen. The resolution doesn't matter. And what the customer is going to see based on this 3X is just everything working the same, but a bigger screen and sharper. So it makes sense in that regard, too.
So is there any lost opportunity here? Because one of the points that Steve Jobs made about the iPad is that when you have the bigger screen, you can make a higher class of software. And for example, iPad software typically shows side-by-side column views, 2 column views. The iPhone typically shows 1 column view. If all you're doing is scaling, you are still stuck with the same basic interface that you had when you began. But if you start increasing pixels, which is what Google's done with what Android's done with some of the Galaxy products, you're adding more pixels to display, you could theoretically start doing more advanced software. You think that's something Apple needs to worry about yet, or do you think the iPhone is just so well known that they can ride that for a couple more years?
I think something else. I think it's that they need to keep selling iPads. I think that they have a clearly defined product line of what they want each product to be used for. They want people to have multiple hardware products, because remember, the software is just, and these resolution things, these are just like little nitty-gritty things. They don't really matter in the long run in terms of what Apple's real goal is. Apple's real goal is to make tons of money. They don't always put it that way, but their goal is to just increase their, monetary treasure chest as much as they can. So.
There's Scrooge McDuck money bin.
Yes, exactly. They're part of goal.
I guess that's how you read it, Peter, right? Like Tim Cook says that they want to make products that delight users, and that kind of means that people will buy them and Apple will profit from the hardware that they buy. And like with OS X now, the software is sort of a free value add that makes that hardware more valuable to them.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, delighted customers are happy customers, and they're customers who are buying products. How do you delight them? Well, that's kind of esoteric, and that's the nitty-gritty of what Apple does so much better than anyone else. So we'll see.
It's interesting because there's this parallel in movies, and I forget the guy's name, the guy who directed Back to the Future.
Zemeckis.
He once said that people do not like to be surprised. They want to have more of the same but a little bit different, which is why he would put so many spoilers in his trailer. And he said, that's why we go back to McDonald's, or that's why we go back to chain restaurants, because it's not going to be the best meal we've ever had, but it's not going to be the worst, and it's going to be what we expect. And that, in some ways, I mean, Apple does change things, but in some ways, the core experience of the Mac, the core experience of iOS now is defined. You're never going to be shocked in either a great or a bad way, and that provides a certain level of comfort, I think.
I think it does, and that's I guess is true in what Apple does as it is with any other company. You can't, and I mean the same thing that Zemeckis said about movies is the same reason why we don't see a lot of innovation happen all at once in the automotive industry. People who buy cars like technology in their cars, but they like predictable technology in their cars. They like technology that they understand, which is why it took us a while to get from regular seat belts to passive restraint systems to just accepting that airbags were everywhere. And sure, there are regulatory hurdles and there are other technology hurdles and there are economic scales when you're moving your engineering around like that. But the bottom line is, people don't want to be surprised and just jump in a car and have it drive itself and do all these other things without expecting sort of a continuity. And you see this in the way that Apple evolves products over time. You can sit somebody down with a classic Mac OS machine, a beige Macintosh running Mac OS 9, and if they're familiar with OS 10, they're going to get it. Or if they're familiar with Windows, they're going to get it pretty quickly. Some things may not be obvious to them, but you can move the mouse around, you can open Windows, you can open applications, same story. There's been a continuity, and we've talked about this on the show before, that there's a continuity in what Apple does. And as long as they balance that expectation of novelty with the continuity that we expect, I think that that's really where the meat of their focus is.
No, I think that's very true. And Mark, I think that's the reason we don't see like a triangular iPad one year.
Also, that would be pretty crazy, triangular iPad. But it's even crazier that it's taking Apple this long to make a bigger screen phone too.
Yeah, it's sometimes they seem to be quite stubborn, don't they, Mark?
Oh, definitely. And I think I don't want to play the Steve Jobs would never do this card, but I can certainly tell you that Steve Jobs would not be. He'd be very stubborn about it. He'd really make them think about it. They were so obsessed with like the 9.7-inch screen of the iPad and so anti 7-inch screens, and Apple made such a big deal about why the iPhone screen is perfect. I don't think it would have been an easy move had Steve been around at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, also in terms of market realities. My understanding is that big screen, so if we do a little bit of history here, big screen phones first came along because early Android makers wanted to differentiate with LTE, and LTE was incredibly power hungry. They needed big batteries, and the way you cover big batteries was with big screens. And then they realized that was a differentiator, that one of the ways they could compete against Apple was by making a physically larger product, because people like big TVs, they would like big phones. And that continued, but it didn't gain much traction. Like if you look at the actual sales numbers, a couple of years ago, Apple was selling more iPhones than every other phone combined in North America, including the big screen phones. And that's changed more rapidly in Asia, but it hasn't changed that fast in North America. And Apple, the super large screen phones, the phablets, still sell very poorly in North America, but they sell really well in Asia. And Apple's trapped into their 2-year cycle, so they went to Retina. 2 years later, they went to 16 by 9, and if they were going to go larger, this would be the 2-year cycle. So I think it's sort of a confluence of markets maturing enough to where big screens are necessary and not just a differentiator, but also it happens to fit this year into Apple's product cycle.
And I don't think that we're expecting a phablet, are we? I mean, because phablets are still kind of a specialized thing in the North American market. They're not where they're selling well. They're people's primary computing device. They're people who don't have laptops. They're people who don't have desktop computers, or even full-sized iPads or iPad Minis. They're people you buy one device and it's got to do everything. So it makes sense to have something bigger that you can also make phone calls on. For us, we can afford. As a consumer culture, to have a slightly more specialized take on it.
Yeah, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong with this, but there's a subtle difference between primary computing device and only computing device. Like there are people who want to use their phone, and their phone is necessary, but like all of us also have an iPad, also have a computer. So, we can move to a bigger screen device or a keyboard device or what we want. But there are people in North America who are high-order geeks and people around the world who can't afford it, who just have one computing device. And the advantage to them is these larger screens allow them to do more with that one computing device that also has to be a phone.
I don't disagree, and of course, like you said, that's a market. And if Apple wants to, really, step up and not risk being made irrelevant by Samsung in the future, they're going to have to address all these markets and the consumer tastes of today and tomorrow.
And it's a nice way to hurt Samsung too, Peter, because Apple's share of because right now, and I've said this before, metrics in smartphones and phones suck. They're treated incredibly immaturely. In every other industry, there's a lot more and a lot better segmentation. And when you look at the numbers, Apple has 0% share of the under $400 phone market. They have a huge percentage share of the over $600 phone market. And Samsung's share of those comes from large screen devices. So Apple has not entered that space yet. If they do, it's likely they will get at least some share of that, and that's put more pressure on their competition as well.
Indeed, it has, and I guess the big question is what is Apple prepared to do about that? Is Apple prepared to move into a new market segment?
It seems like that's what they seem to do to me, Mark, is that they do one thing, they do it really well, like they do the iPhone and AT&T, do it really well, get almost all the value out of it, and then add an adjacent market, like they add Verizon, or they add the bigger screen, or they add the iPad, then they add the iPad mini. They seem to want to do it one segment at a time.
Yeah, I mean, Apple always expresses about how it's going to take its time with every single thing that it works on and get it right. So, I think they've been demonstrating that they're sticking to that culture, and I don't think that's going to change.
All right, so moving along, one thing that I've heard about Craig Federighi is that he tends towards the geek far more than Steve Jobs did, far more than Scott Forstall did, and I think we saw that a bit with things like in Mavericks, like power shaming, and some of the power user features, quite frankly, which we've heard firsthand would not have been done under previous OS X leadership. I wonder if that ties into the rumor that you had about, or the story you had about iOS 8 and the iPad finally getting multi-window, and not only multi-window, but drag-and-drop multi-window.
Right. I mean, I don't know if that's a Craig Federighi thing. They've been working, you say this all the time, iOS is a continuum, and they've had features in development for years, and it's just like, when are we going to make this feature a priority? Where are we on the checklist? Where are we on the low-hanging fruit? And I think in this modern day, 2014, with the Microsoft Surface, the Samsung tablets, all these other tablets, it doesn't matter how well they're selling, but clearly there's people using this multitasking feature to be able to have two windows open at once. And if they want to continue pushing this post-PC agenda and saying that, the iPad is the future, it's going to surpass notebooks in sales over the next 5 years. Tim Cook says this every earnings call until he puts everyone to sleep. They're going to have to make moves like this, like making the iPad more, compatible with more software and making it more comparable to the laptops. So I think that's what the move is driven by, not necessarily Craig Federighi's new engineering culture.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you are right. There are different things. Like CarPlay took years and years because they had to wait for the car industry, and Apple was livid, but they had nothing they could do. Things like AirDrop was like, no, I'm not putting this on my phone. No, I'm not putting this on my phone. Oh, hey, that's interesting. Let's do it. So there are multiple forces at play. The thing that was so interesting to me, though, is that it was drag and drop, because going back to WebOS cards, multiple windows never interested me on mobile if all I could do was sort of look at something and type it out, which is what a lot of people wanted. I want a web page and a text editor. That's okay, but that seems like wasted potential. But the ability to move data between applications, and I understand that Microsoft does this in some level on their Surface products, that to me was a holy grail of multi-windows. And that, I think, like cut and paste, probably took time. It probably took time to get multi-window right, like it did multitasking and all the other things.
Yeah, I'm told the user interface for this is very slick. Have you heard anything about this? Or?
I have not. This was a Mark Gurman exclusive. I had not heard about this one.
Yeah.
That would be very cool, because that's always been a pain point of mine when it comes to manipulating an iOS interface. Just being able to copy and paste content between applications is excruciatingly painful to do, and makes me run for my Macintosh every time I have to do it in iOS. So if Apple has cracked that puzzle, God bless them. I'm looking forward to it.
Right. I mean, this can get pulled by the announcement. I'm consistently told by everyone I know that they are really considering and they're having trouble with some of the feature implementations for 8.0. So it's very possible they're going to push some of these things back to an 8.1, an 8.2, or even like a 9.0 next year. So we'll see how this all plays out over the next 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people give you, crap is the right word for this kind of stuff, but that's the reality that we live in. Like, it is a worse world if you're not reporting this stuff. And Apple does, I mean, AirPlay for iTunes Extras, print to PDF. There's features that just fell off and have never been put back in. XPC and Backboard, they were ported over in iOS 5, maybe, certainly by 6.
Yeah.
And Apple hasn't done anything with them. The background downloads, that was supposed to be iOS 6. It's supposed to go with the new podcast apps. Got delayed all the way till iOS 7. That's the reality of what they're working on. They are sprinting marathons, one after the other, forced marches, and you just can't finish everything for time. So if you don't see it in iOS 8, it might be 1, it might be 9, exactly what you said. But I'm happy that they are at least working on it, because then the chances are we will get it sometime sooner rather than later.
Yeah, precisely.
And one of the other things I wanted to mention earlier and I forgot is when they talk about like these screen sizes, like the at 3x, Apple prototypes everything. If there's a rumor about an Apple product, Apple likely thought about it before the analyst or before anything. They're a logical company. They are famous for prototypes. Johnny Ive has millions of dollars of machines for just that reason. So if you can imagine a touchscreen Mac, if you can imagine an ARM Mac, if you can imagine all different size iPhones running all different size resolutions, chances are someone has thought of that. There's a joke that people go to Apple going, "Why don't you idiots do this?" And they set them down and they go, "This is when we tried it 5 years ago. This is what went wrong." And then they're very quickly disabused of any, Apple are idiots. They don't think of these things, sort of stuff. But it's interesting to me in what they choose to go forward with when they whether they go forward with 3x or they go forward with multitasking. How they do it is really interesting to me. Like you said, the interface to me is going to be the really interesting part of this.
Right, we'll see. I mean, yeah, like you said, they prototype so many different resolutions, and of course, this is just one of many. But I'm thinking this will be it, just for the logical reasons. It's just very. I hate to use the word Apple as a describing word, but it's very Apple to go 3x. It's logical, makes sense for the consumer, makes sense from a marketing standpoint, makes sense technologically, makes sense for the developer, makes sense for us. I mean.
And the one thing, Peter, that also makes sense is that Apple prioritizes battery. It is one of the holy grails for them. And if you put a ton more pixels, you've got to have a GPU that moves them around. If you make super dense pixels, you've got to have LED light that can push through that. And then you start to have battery problems, which is what kept the iPad from going Retina for a while, what made it big and bulky when it did go Retina. This, to me, is a responsible way of doing it so that you get more resolution, but you don't get an absurd amount that then costs you battery.
Yeah, it's the I don't know why she swallowed that fly problem sort of, applied to technology. Everything has repercussions and consequences. You can't have a larger screen, more pixels on the screen without using a lot more power. You can't have more power without, increasing battery capacity or, shrinking electronics to use even less juice than they do now. And unfortunately, Apple really can't move, the pace of battery manufacturing any faster than it already is. So there are just physical limits to what the company can do based on what its engineering requirements are.
I think that's true, and I think that, the battery is also a huge thermal insulator. You put a big battery in, and all of a sudden you've got to clock down CPUs because they can't get as hot as they could otherwise. They can't run hot for a long period of time because you've got that big insulator there. So there's a lot of technological walls they hit up to.
Mm-hmm.
Switching gears, actually, before we switch gears, I'm going to tell you guys about something awesome. We're lucky to have a sponsor on the show. Yeah, we're introducing sponsors to our shows. If you've been curious, a lot of people have asked us. They say they like the shows. They wish they could support them. So supporting our sponsors is a great way to support them. And we're starting off with Squarespace. Now, Squarespace, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. If you're not already, it is an all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, or online store. I used to be a web developer. I was a web developer in the really early days of web development. I made my first websites on Notepad and Corel Paint and Corel Draw. Yeah, it was brutal. And then something interesting happened. The GeoCities and the other online sites came aboard, the MySpaces, and suddenly everybody can make a website. But they were horrible. They were ugly. They made the web a worse place. And that's sort of the opposite of Squarespace, because Squarespace allows you to easily make your own website. You don't have to be a coder. You don't have to be a designer. If you are, great. They give you a lot of ways to make your own code and to make your own designs. But if you just want a website that is easy to make, that will work, that'll make your personality, your product, your voice look great, then they have fantastic templates, very easy to use software, terrific designs, and most importantly for you is they are going to give us a free trial at 10% off if you go to squarespace.com. I'll make sure I get this right. Offer code iMore. So squarespace.com/iMore, and you enter the code iMore at checkout. So all you do, squarespace.com/iMore, you enter the checkout code iMore, and it's a better way to start building your website. It will make a website. They include shopping carts. They include everything you need. I was talking to a friend of mine who wanted to do a website because she had plans to make a set of products, and she was looking over the web and all the different components she would have to string together to make a workable website. It made me stressed. It made me hesitant. But I showed her Squarespace. This is an absolute true story. She went there. She signed up. She's working on it now. It had everything she needed to get started. And that, to me, that user experience of doing it is what makes this so valuable. So you can start a trial with no credit card required. You can start building your web space right away. If and when you decide to sign up, all you have to do, again, squarespace.com/iMore, put in offer code iMore. You get 10% off your first purchase, and you can show your support for iMore and for our podcast. So I want to thank Squarespace for being our first sponsor, for being the iMore Show's first sponsor, and I want to thank them for helping everyone make more awesome websites. All right, now I get to grill Mark about OS 10.10.
Good. I'm excited.
So what I heard last year at WWDC 2013 when iOS 7 came out is that a redesign for iOS 10.10 was in the plans. It was just physically, like they would have been walking over the bodies of designers if they tried to do anything other than iOS 7. So it sounds like this year, I mean, iOS 7 is solidified, 7.1 is much better, 8's going to be probably even more refined. It sounds like now, Mark, they have the time to go back and make and give OS 10.10 some attention.
Yeah, it's going to have an overhaul. It's going to be less dramatic than iOS 7. It's going to make sense in context of being used on laptops and the keyboard and mouse and desktops with a keyboard and mouse or a trackpad. So I don't expect anything as shocking or polarizing as what iOS 7 was when it was announced, but expect some of that flatter, whiter, less skeuomorphic aesthetic without the yellow-bound notepad, the letter reminders app. Green felt Game Center is going to go away. But in some areas of the system, there will be some shocking design changes, and I'll talk about that at another point. But there's going to be some stuff that might be shocking to some people, but people will seem to understand it. Things are not going to be going away that make a Mac either. There's going to be mission control, the dock, the launchpad, this and that. So I don't think it's going to be a huge fundamental shift. It's going to be an aesthetic change.
And Peter has talked about that before. Like, yeah, absolutely, the Mac is a fundamentally different environment, and they have to be cognizant of, not just multiple windows, but many multiple layered windows on top of each other. And to be able to differentiate that, there's going to be a bunch of context. But Peter, you've been talking about this for a while too, that there has to be some sort of way to onboard iOS users onto the Mac, because familiarity and consistency is a user feature.
Yeah, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, right? But no, seriously, it makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense for reasons not specific to iOS or OS 10 either. Again, getting back to what we were talking about before, consumers really value a consistent user experience, and it just makes sense to evolve OS 10 in that direction. And let's face it, it's been a while since we've seen any real major physical changes to the user interface of OS 10. So I think the time is ripe for Apple to take another look at that and figure out a better way to do it.
And it's interesting because, Mark, you have perhaps as much as anybody called back to Tim Cook's new products across 2014. and we haven't seen anything really. I mean, we got an 8 GB iPhone 5C, and we got a bump to the MacBook Air. Those are really iterative things. They're not new products. But going into WWDC, where there's not going to be an iWatch, there's the Apple TV that we've kept hearing about. That's got so many good people working on it. It's not going to show up there. It's going to be a software show. Do you think OS 10.10 is a big enough thing for Apple's first keynote of the year?
No. I think that the CEO of a public company who made statements on financial calls regarding new product categories, I know Peter's not going to agree with me here, and new products across 2014 needs to be held accountable for those statements. I think that we need a reason, whether it comes through a controlled leak or through a statement in a next conference call. What happened? Why? What happened to that promise? I mean, I don't care. I'm just looking at it from an investor standpoint, which I'm not. I'm just trying to think about how some of these people's minds might work.
And nobody asked him last call, right? He was not asked about that in his last conference call.
Yeah, that was kind of ridiculous. Either these analysts are not paying attention, or they're pre-briefed not to ask these questions. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just delusional. I don't know.
Peter, do you take exception to that? Do you think that that's because Mark thinks you're going to argue with him?
No, I don't actually. I mean, he did say across 2014, and here we are halfway into 2014, and there's been, nothing in the way of new product categories. I don't know if that was a matter of Apple missing a milestone that Tim fully expected them to hit, or things not gelling correctly, or Tim just waxing esoteric. I don't know how accountable he can be held for saying that in terms of some sort of shareholder retribution or reaction on Wall Street outside of what's already happened. I think that Apple's stock value, Apple's value to Wall Street is based on not only the performance of the company, but also on their own metrics that have absolutely nothing to do with what Tim Cook says. Personally, though, I'd like to beat him with a wet noodle for teasing me and telling me that I was going to see amazing new things throughout 2014, and so far, straight up until mid-May where we're at now, this year has sucked for new Apple stuff for me to get excited about.
Yeah, so I mean, last year we didn't get very much at all until WWDC, and then they teased the new Mac Pro, but then we didn't get the new. Most of their products were released in the September-October timeframe, before the holidays. It looks like this is going to be the same thing, and I understand that getting these products out is really hard and it takes a lot of time. I think maybe if he had it to do over again, he wouldn't have made that statement. I think there's a profound amount of pressure from Wall Street for him to say stuff like that, but I think that's not how Apple typically works, and I think if that's not how Apple typically works, they should just, as much crap as they get, they should probably take that crap and not really worry about it, because their schedule, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I don't want a crappy Apple TV or a crappy iWatch, so if deadlines slip and they don't ship, I would rather they wait until the products are fully formed. But it's hard to go entire years where other consumer electronics companies are putting out product after product after product, and Apple is just quiet until 3 months at the end of the year every time.
And remember what company we're talking about. We're talking about a company built by Steve Jobs that has existed for decades, that is run by perhaps the best operations executives, designers in the world. So this is the company we're talking about that are slipping on deadlines, that are missing expectations, that are not keeping to these forward-looking statements. So I mean, you have to take a look at here. What's going on there? So.
Yeah. That, I mean, because getting the iPhone demoed at Macworld was really, really hard, but they got it done. But they had never promised that. So if that had not happened, if it had been demoed at WWDC or at a special event in April instead, that would have been fine. Very few people would have been the wiser. The same with the iPad. If there had not been a special event in January, if it hadn't been ready, they could have done that in April. They could have done that in June. When you start putting on the pressure of new product categories and then you don't have anything, I think that's harder. I think if something went fundamentally wrong with the Apple TV, they couldn't get the right components, or the software is not finished. We know the iPhone 4S was delayed. The iPhone 4S went into September because the iCloud and Siri took that long. Not delayed like an unannounced product, but the It took them longer to make iOS 5 than it took them to make any previous version of iOS, and it made the product late. Again, no, late's the wrong word. It made the product release in fall instead of in summer the way other products had. That could easily happen with an Apple TV, and if you hadn't said there'll be new products across 2014, people would just complain that Apple's not releasing anything new. So I think that's the danger of pre-announcing, and that's the danger Apple has previously avoided that they're not sort of avoiding this time.
Well, the question becomes, how big a deal is WWDC going to be? Because clearly nothing's going to happen between now and then. It's only 2 weeks out, and WWDC is typically a showcase for Apple to announce what it is working on, not just in terms of OSs, but it's been an important venue for the company to roll out new hardware as well. So does that put the pressure on Apple to make the WWDC keynote even more critical, I guess, than it might be otherwise, or is that not going to happen at all?
I think that we will see new hardware at WWDC. I think they're either going to have some new notebook that's ready to go, or they'll pre-announce some hardware Mac Pro style like they did last year. So I think there should be some things to be excited about other than iOS 8 and 10.10. Oh, there's also going to be some new iCloud stuff for developers and consumers, which people might like. So I think there's stuff to be excited about other than what's already known. Will there be an Apple TV? Probably not. Will there be a watch? Probably not. Will there be an iToaster? Probably not. But I think we're going to get a sense of where the company's going for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that I want, because going back to what we were talking about with Apple as a fashion brand, the idea is that they could, if they wanted to, Apple could make their own $300 headphones, which is a huge margin product. Apple could. There's a lot of ancillary areas Apple could annex. They already make their own mice, their own trackpads. Making more accessories themselves for iPhone and iPad is a business they could think about. You've also been doing fantastic reporting on all the health stuff, Mark, including all. Absolutely. I wish everyone would give you great credit for that, because it's really well deserved.
It's interesting because I've been writing lots of health-related stuff for the last year or so. I had this big story it was June or July last year going over all Apple's work in the health space. And then like Reuters, they come out last week with a story literally saying absolutely everything I've said, presenting it as new information, and basically lying to their readers about like, oh, they discovered all this stuff. So I didn't think that was very fair. So I appreciate the credit, Rene.
No, I mean, that's one of the worst things about the internet, is that nobody has any memory, and you can write something 3 months ago and then someone else can write it like today, and everyone will flock to that story as if there's always a percentage of the internet that hasn't seen what you wrote, and people take advantage of that, and it's sad. But you've done a bang-up job with that. I'm just curious how big a deal that could be for Apple. I mean, obviously it's an altruistic goal, the way education was when they did that January event. We got iBooks, textbooks, and stuff like that. Health is a big deal. Healthbook would be a great app. I've said before, right now I'm happy because the iPhone 5S can keep track of my steps. I don't need to carry a Fitbit with me. But if I'm running or at a gym or grappling, I don't want my iPhone on me, but maybe I'll have a band. And the ability for all of that to be tracked regardless of what I'm wearing or have with me is really appealing. So a repository like Healthbook, where it would just pull in all that data and I'd be almost decoupled from the specific hardware, fantastic idea. But I think also the way you're reporting it is great, because a lot of these are recent hires over the last year. Even you've reported some very recently, and I think sometimes people expect that the minute Apple hires somebody, 2 days later we'll get that product.
Right. I mean, they're hiring the best of the best in terms of the medical science, biometric, and all these areas of health management. But the interesting part about this is that they really started going on this hiring spree and assembling these teams between June and September, October-ish of 2013, and throughout the first half of this year. So it seems like they're ramping up right now. So I don't know what that means for Apple. And there's talk of the iWatch being released later this year. You see how long the iPhone took to develop, the iPad, 2.5, 3 years. It was a Sparkle and Steve Jobs' iFree 3 years before that. So, it's to be seen. Is this health stuff going to be a Gen 1 feature for the iWatch, or is Apple's play for, iterating in terms of wearable device, adding a few new really cool revolutionary sensors year after year until they get to that milestone of what they think this health band should look like? I don't think Healthbook really requires any of these scientists and all that. That's a very core software thing that they could just build APIs to work with the existing industry of iPhone connected health accessories around it. But of course, Apple's ambitions are always much larger. And if you look at Apple's past hiring strategies for products that they're working on, if they throw in, throw their hat in the ring and really go after the best of the best resources, doesn't matter what industry it is, they're going to do some great stuff. Like Apple was interested in unlocking your phone with a fingerprint. So what did they do? They bought the very best fingerprint technology. They hired the very best biometric people. Apple wanted, voice technology in the iPhone. They bought Siri. It hasn't been perfect, but it's getting there. Maps, they screwed up on that. So, it's better than a crapshoot. But Apple, they can't do anything more than just hiring the best of the best. There's only so much they can do.
I think that's a great point, and that I think it bears repeating too that the iPhone 5 is not the original iPhone, the iPad Air is not the original iPad, and you can imagine that when the iWatch 5 or whatever is going to be leaps and bounds whatever we get first. But that's exactly their pattern. They bought Touch ID, so they bought Authentic, and now we have Touch ID, but we have the very beginnings of Touch ID. It only does a couple of things, does it really well, but it'll move into iPad and it'll move into other areas. Siri was only on the iPhone 4S, and it only did very few things, and then it moved to other devices and it moved into other features. And I think when people say, "Oh, Apple can't do that," it's reported that Healthbook is the watch or the iPhone 6 is going to measure this or that thing, and the medical people say, "Well, that's impossible." Yes, today, but Apple's not building for today. They're not building a product. They're building a product line, and the way you get to a product line is to start now and build it out. And that's what makes it so interesting to me is those people that you mentioned, when I look 4 or 5 years down the road, that's some incredibly compelling brain power to have working.
Yeah, like you said, they're looking at a path. So,
Peter, are we still convinced that customers will flock to a health band more than they will flock to a fast food coupon?
My feeling on it is that customers aren't going to flock to this, but are just going to sort of naturally use it. There's going to be a few little blips here and there as people read about the benefits of the new operating system and want to try out all the features because people like to play with new toys. But I had read a report a few months back that said within 6 months. Most users in North America who have bought fitness bands, whether they're Fit bands, whether they're the Jawbone thing or Nike's Fuel Band or whatever else, stuck them in drawers after about 6 months. The user experience is just not sticky for a big segment of people. I don't know if Apple's going to be able to crack that particular problem. It just seems like some people have decided that all this health telemetry tracking is just not how they want to use their devices or how they want to use their spare time, for that matter. But there is a big segment of the population. That means that half of the people who are using these products continue to use them after 6 months. So that's a sizable block of people.
I agree with that completely, and I don't like it when I can't argue with you, Peter.
No, that's all right. I'll come up with something else that you can argue with me on.
Awesome. Yeah, because that was the thing with me. Like, I have almost every one of those wristbands. They're all sitting in a little pile there because either the charger was finicky and it became a pain to charge and they didn't last, or they were uncomfortable, they kept hitting against my keyboard, or whatever. And there is room for innovation there. And Mark, I think that's one of the interesting things because you talked about Nest. And the question is, like, is it in Apple's best interest to buy like a Nest and get into home innovation and maybe bring Tony Fadell back into a company that may or may not have room for him? Or is it their best interest to make things like CarPlay and Healthbook that will mean that if you have these other people's devices, you'll get a fantastic experience using iOS with it? Like iOS could make your car better, it could make your fitness band better, it could make your blood monitor better, and it won't be another iPhone, but there might be thousands of other things that Apple can use to add value to their existing products, and that's also what makes it so exciting for me.
I disagree in terms of that being a differentiation. I think that Nest and everything you just talked about the iOS experience on all the other devices you own, whether that be your car, your fridge, or whatnot, is the same thing as what Nest would be. You would just be giving an iOS experience for your house. Lots of people have houses, apartments, and thermostats, and I think that would be a tremendous addressable market. And something that, what Apple does is they don't create completely new areas. They took a phone and they made it into a real, what we know as a phone today. They took a tablet and they turned it into the iPad. They took a computer and turned it into a personal computer. Why not take a thermostat and turn it into something that's actually useful? Why not take, what else are they doing? Nest Protect, I mean, which is actually, that was recalled, right? So it's just, the home is just such a natural extension of everything, just like CarPlay is a natural extension into your car, and just like AirPlay and all these other things. So I think Nest really would have been a good fit. I don't know if culturally. I mean, clearly, maybe culturally, because all these people, or over like 2/3 of them, were hired at Apple at some point. So, but I can't say that with certainty. But what I can say is I really think that the home would have been a great place for Apple to go into eventually. And I mean, we talk about all this all the time. Apple is so resource constrained. Buying all these engineers and all this hardware expertise, these existing product lines for the home would have been given Apple a really nice head start.
Yeah, they have to basically get anybody who is willing to work in Cupertino, that has sufficient skills and that isn't tempted by a Google or Facebook or a company like the what do they call it? A venture capital company that will offer them huge upfront stock guarantees. I mean, working for Apple is hard. I think I've said this before, but I know people who work at Facebook and Google and sometimes have very little to do in the month, and they make monstrous amounts of money. And going to Apple, where you're sleeping under your desk occasionally, you know, that is a tough thing to do sometimes. So I think you're absolutely right. I think Guy English said this a long time ago. Retention and talent is their biggest challenge, and that is still something. I don't know how they'll solve that. Campus 2?
Maybe. People seem excited about it.
All right, so Mark, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to read, and I just want to say again, you've done incredible work this year on your reporting. Kudos to you.
Thanks.
If people want to read it, where can they go?
We can go to 9to5mac.com and search for my stories. Also, Twitter at Mark Gurman. I'm a good follow.
You are a good follow. One of my favorites. You were sort of self-deprecating in saying that people don't follow you because you're funny, but you have a pretty awesome Twitter account.
Thank you.
Peter, how about you?
On Twitter at Flarg, Flargh, and at iMore. Feel free to come check me out. I don't know if I'm really that good to follow. I don't know if I want any more people following me on Twitter.
If you like the occasional rage tweets, especially Godzilla-influenced, a lot of good music stuff, a lot of good Mac tips, you're also an amazing follow, Peter.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, the only problem is I work blue.
Yeah, not safe for work.
Not safe for anyone.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me at Mobile Nations and at iMore and all of our other shows. We have Debug for developers, Iterate for designers, Zen and Tech for lifestyle, Vector for analysis, and a bunch of other stuff. Just go to mobilenations.com. They're all listed here. I want to thank Squarespace for being our sponsor. They're the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, online store, whatever you need on the web. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com/iMore. Enter the offer code iMore at checkout. It is your first step towards a better, brighter website future. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you,
guys.
Rene.
Appreciate it.
You guys rock.